Once a famous leader named Winston Churchill said, "Russia is like a puzzle. It's complicated and hard to understand, but don't worry, we can learn about it together." Russia is the biggest country in the whole world. It's so big that it takes 11 hours to travel across it from one side to the other. Imagine that. Russia is located way up north, where Europe and Asia meet. It even shares borders with 16 other countries. Russia might be big, but not all of it is cozy for people to live in. In some cities way up north, like Yakutsk, it gets so cold that car engines need to run all day long, even when parked. People even wrap blankets around car batteries to keep them warm. That's how cold it gets. Even though Russia is giant, with an area twice the size of the United States, only a little more than a third of the land is good for people to live on. The rest, a whopping 65%, is covered in permafrost, which is like permanently frozen ground. This makes it hard to grow crops or build houses in those areas. Russia also has a short season for growing food. In most places, you only have 2 to 4 months to plant things and harvest them before it gets too cold again. This is much shorter than countries in Europe or the US, where they might have 8 or 9 months to grow crops. Despite the cold and the permafrost, Russia has a lot of variety in its landscape. You can find everything from flat, grassy plains called tundras to thick forests, tall mountains, and even warm beaches down south. Russia is kind of like a storehouse full of treasures. It has massive amounts of natural resources under the ground, like oil and gas, the most natural gas in the world, and even forests. The World Bank says all these resources together are worth more than $70 trillion, which is a super high number. With all this wealth underground, you might think everyone in Russia would be rich, like in some European countries. But that's not quite true. The average person in Russia makes around $100 a month, which isn't that much. It's like Russia is rich, but its people aren't always seeing that money. This happens in some other countries too. One reason for this is that most of the big companies in Russia are owned by the government, not by regular people. These companies are like the gas and oil giants Gazprom and Rosneft, or even the train system and the mail service. There are some successful private businesses though, like a grocery store chain called Magnet. Another thing to know is that the minimum wage in Russia isn't very high, only around $200 a month. But there are some good things too. Lots of things in Russia cost less than in Western countries, like taxi rides. Russia also has some successful tech companies like Kaspersky Lab for computer security or the social network VK. However, even these companies seem to have to follow a lot of government rules about what they can and can't do. There are a few reasons why Russia isn't quite at the top of the tech game when compared to Western countries. It's not just one thing, but more like a bunch of smaller problems that add up. Imagine trying to run a race with heavy weights tied to your ankles. That's kind of what Russia is facing in the tech world. One big problem is something called corruption. This means that people in powerful positions might take advantage of their jobs to get richer themselves, instead of focusing on making things better for everyone. This can slow things down because getting anything done might involve extra steps or waiting for special permission. It's like having to fill out a ton of forms every time you want to use the internet. Another issue is red tape. This refers to all the complicated rules and regulations that can make it difficult to get things done. Think of it like having to navigate a maze with a million twists and turns before you can even start using your phone. All this extra stuff makes it harder and slower for Russia to develop its tech infrastructure, which is everything that makes the internet, energy, and cell phone systems work smoothly. Even though most Russians live in cities now, let's take a closer look at the situation in Moscow, the biggest city. Moscow is a giant city, the biggest in all of Russia. Many people in Russia dream of living there because you can earn way more money than in other parts of the country, sometimes 3 to 5 times more. Imagine getting paid 3 times what you get now for doing the same job. That's pretty exciting. In fact, Moscow is so busy that in 2019, there were over 18 million people using the public transportation system every single day. That's a whole lot of people on the move. To put that in perspective, that's more people than live in both New York City and London combined. On top of all that, Moscow is a very wealthy city. It's actually one of the top 5 in the entire world for having the most billionaires. As of April 2023, there were over 105 billionaires living in Moscow, according to Forbes magazine. That's more billionaires than you'd find in Germany, India, China, or even the United States. Russia is a massive country with many interesting cities to visit. St. Petersburg is a beautiful city that many people compare to Paris and Rome. It's known for its canals and grand buildings, and visitors often find it easier to communicate in English than in other parts of Russia. Novosibirsk, Russia's third largest city, is a scientific hub. It has a large university area with many research centers, making it a great place to learn about science and technology. Yekaterinburg is a green city with a rich history. It's located in the Ural Mountains, which mark the border between Europe and Asia. Interestingly, this city is known for having the highest mayonnaise consumption in the country. Kazan is a fascinating city with a mix of Tatar and Russian cultures. It's located on the Volga River, a major waterway in Russia. The Kazan Kremlin is a beautiful fortress that's a popular tourist destination. Krasnodar is a warm and sunny city that's attracting many people from colder parts of Russia. It's close to the Black Sea coast and the Caucasus Mountains, making it a great place for outdoor activities. While these cities offer a lot to see and do, it's important to remember that Russia is a country of contrasts. Many villages, especially in remote areas, struggle with a lack of opportunities and resources. Russia boasts some amazing natural wonders as well. Lake Baikal, for example, is the world's deepest freshwater lake. The Altai Mountains and the Kamchatka Peninsula offer stunning scenery and abundant wildlife. Adventurous travelers can even take a trip on the Trans-Siberian Railroad or an icebreaker cruise to the Arctic. Despite its challenges, Russia remains a popular tourist destination, especially for those who want to experience a different culture and see some of the world's most unique natural beauty. Russia has a giant train system that stretches across the country. In fact, it's the third biggest train system in the world, after the United States and China. One interesting thing about trains in Russia is that many people have little summer houses in the countryside. They can easily hop on a train and spend their summers relaxing at their cottage, growing vegetables, and enjoying picnics outdoors. Speaking of trains, the longest train ride you can take in Russia goes from Moscow all the way to Vladivostok, which is on the other side of the country. That trip takes you through 7 different time zones and lasts over a week. You might be picturing scary mobsters everywhere when you imagine Russia, but tourists are often surprised to find that things are quite safe and peaceful. It's true that Russia does have its own car manufacturer called VAZ, and they sell a lot of cars in the country, and their market share is more than 30%. Here's an interesting fact about safety. Russia has a higher murder rate than some European countries. However, rape statistics show the opposite. Russia's rate is actually lower than some European countries. So, depending on what you're worried about, safety in Russia might look different than what you expect. Another thing to know about Russia is that healthcare is free for everyone. However, the average lifespan in Russia is lower than in Europe. On the other hand, more babies are born in Russia than in most European countries. Visitors often enjoy the fast food scene in Russia. It might be because they can get beer with their meal, or because things seem cleaner and more pleasant than in some other countries. Homelessness seems less common in Russia, and the food options have gotten better overall. Russian women are known for taking pride in their appearance, and you might see them dressed up even for everyday things. One cultural difference to keep in mind is that smiling at strangers isn't as common in Russia as it is in some places. It can actually seem strange to some people. Russians are a patriotic bunch though, and they love getting together for tea, vodka, and conversations about life. Even though they might seem reserved at first, many foreigners are surprised by how welcoming Russians can be. So, next time you're on the subway in Russia, remember a smile might not be the best way to break the ice. Overall, Russia seems like a place with a rich history, strong traditions, and a growing interest in healthy living. It sounds like a country with a lot of potential for the future.